I'm back. And for this last part of the lecture, we will be talking about within subjects designs. That's the second of the two big families of designs that I said I would talk about way at the beginning of this lecture. So this is the second family. It's within subjects designs. And as I hope you remember, they differ from the between subjects design in the fact that it's the same people who go through every condition. So in the between subjects designs, we had different people go through each condition. And the within subjects designs, the same people go through each conditions. And the within subjects designs are sometimes called the ultimate matched groups design. You might be wondering what we mean by the ultimate. Well, what we mean is in a within subjects design, the groups are so well matched, they're the same people. So it's the ultimate matched group design. You control for every possible confounding variable because they're the same people in every group. So the good news, as you might be figuring out, is the within subjects designs can pick up very small differences between conditions because they're the same people in every group. So let's talk a little more about them. They look like this, and using our previous example, let's say we're going to do a study of whether coconut oil helps you lose weight. So in this case, I get a population of people who want to lose weight. From that population, I get a sample. And then I put that sample, the whole entire sample, so there's no random assignment or anything. There's no matched assignment. There's no assignment at all because I put everybody in that sample in the first condition, which is where they had 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. The second condition where they had 6 tablespoons of coconut oil every day. And then the third condition where they had 2 cups of coconut oil every day. So that's a within subjects design. Looks like this. Here's an example of a within subjects design that I just showed you. The real outstanding characteristic of this Campbell and Stanley notation is there's one line. So when you see one line, it means there's one group. We observe the group, they get the first condition, we observe or we test them, they get the second condition, we observe them, they get the third condition, then we observe them again. That's it, within subjects design. So the characteristics of a within subject design are also pretty straightforward. I think you probably understand them pretty well by now. Each participant is tested under each condition. In other words, all participants experience all the conditions. So each participant is tested in every group. So they're tested more than one time, and they're given more than one experimental condition. Now, scores in each condition are correlated with scores in the other conditions. Well, that makes sense too, because if the people in each condition are identical, their scores in one condition are going to be related to those same people's scores in the other condition. So the scores in each condition are correlated with the scores in other conditions. And the critical comparison in this design is we compare the scores, the outcomes between groups on the dependent variable. Now, there are strengths and weaknesses of the within subjects designs, and these also you can probably figure out at this point from what you know. The strengths, the within subjects designs are sensitive to very small group differences. And we've already talked about this because they're the same people in every condition. If the conditions are just a little different, having the same people in each group is going to make you more likely to pick up on differences in the conditions. You need fewer participants. You don't have to recruit people for every group. You just recruit one group of people and you put them in each condition. And the instructions may take less time. So if you've got one group of participants going through these different conditions, you don't need to educate them on every little thing every time. You can get them, you can talk to them about the basic procedure at the beginning of the study and just give them reminders with every new condition. Now, the weaknesses, and these are pretty big ones, and we're going to talk about them more in the next slide, is there's potential subject effects. And what that means is that if you've got the same people going through every condition, they might figure out what your study is about. And they might either consciously or unconsciously decide to affect the results of your study. So if they really, truthfully, somewhere deep down believe that coconut is really good for you, they might say they feel healthier under the condition 3 while they're drinking 2 cups a day. So that's potential subject effects. What the subjects think or believe or behave can erroneously influence your study outcomes. But the major issue is the carryover effects. And basically, what carryover effects are conditions, are things that happen in one condition of the study can affect later conditions. And here's a bunch of examples of that. These are 6 carryover effects that are pretty common in within subjects' designs. The first one is learning. And subjects might learn new skills in previous conditions that affect later conditions. And I thought about that when I was talking about that memory test. Even though we set that memory test that I gave you as an example for the matched pairs design, we set that up as a matched pairs design because we couldn't set it up as a within subjects design. If people did that memory test under several different noise conditions, they might do better on the conditions they took later. So the later conditions, they might do better, not because the noise had changed, but because they learned how to be better at that memory test. So that's learning. Something that subjects learn in earlier conditions can help them out in later conditions. So that how they learn is a confounding variable. It can affect later conditions. Fatigue is where subjects get tired. So they might be really fresh and perform well in the early conditions, and then get more tired and perform poorly in later conditions. Not to do with the manipulations in any condition, it's because they get tired. These next 2, habituation and sensitization, are pretty much 2 sides of the same coin. Habituation is where subjects become less sensitive to the independent variable. So let's say my research protocol involves getting rewarded in some way. Let's say I'm going to reward the participants with candy kisses. In the early conditions, that might work really, really well. But in later conditions, my participants are getting used to those candy kisses and they don't work as well. So it might not have been anything to do with what I'm actually testing. It's the fact that participants have gotten used to or habituated to testing procedures in later conditions. So any differences on their performance aren't really due to the independent variable. They're due to the fact that they got used to something going on in the experimental procedure, in this case, candy kisses. I know it would take a lot of candy kisses for me to get tired of them, but I probably could. So habituation is getting used to them. Now, sensitization, which I said was the opposite, that's where subjects get more sensitive in later conditions. So, for example, if someone is using a drug, there are certain drugs that people get more sensitive to as time goes on. The best example of sensitization is not a research example, but I think it gets the point across to anybody who has ever had a brother was my younger brother sensitized me to because he always hit me in the same place. So whenever we'd be fighting or whatever, when we were little, he would always hit me in my arm, right at the top of my arm by my shoulder. So I after several years of this, after most of my childhood of this, I developed kind of a sensitivity there. And whenever I'd get hit in that part of the arm, it always hurt really, really badly because I'd become more sensitive. I had bruised skin. I was more sensitive to that stimulus, which in the example is him hitting me in the arm. So the same principle applies. Is participants can get used to something in the experimental study that that changes down the line. So they're more sensitive to this down the line. So any differences you would see between conditions wouldn't be due to the independent variable. It would be due to because the participants got more sensitive. The next one is contrast, and that's where exposures of different levels that are next to each other influence the other position. So for example, if I'm doing a study that involves some sort of punishment, harsh punishment, like a really hard pinch, is going to feel harder if it's followed by a pencil, just a little prick with a pencil, than it would be if it were followed by an electric shock. So contrast is the difference between conditions that are right next to each other. And so participants might be thinking about what they experienced in the previous condition rather than the actual independent variable. So the differences might be due to the condition themselves and not the independent variable. And then the very last carryover effect for within subjects designs is adaptation. And that is some internal change in subjects. And this is really common in sensation and perception studies. A while ago, several researchers did studies of how what kinds of things people can perceive in the dark. And what they found out that the first few minutes of their study, people acted very differently than conditions in the last few minutes of their study or the last part of their study. And the reason being is adaptation. People get used to the dark. It takes a while for your pupils to get big. And so differences between early conditions and later conditions weren't due to the conditions. They were because of this internal change of the subject. Subjects' pupils got big. They were able to see better in the dark in later conditions. So differences in performance between the conditions were not necessarily due to the conditions or the independent variable themselves. They were due to changes within the subject. They were due to the fact that subjects had adapted to the dark. So that's adaptation. So how do you deal with carryover effects? Well, honestly, it really depends. Some people say, you know what, these are just so severe, I'm not going to deal with them. I'm going to use a between subjects design or a matched pairs design, whatever is appropriate for them. But some people say, you know, I think that we can make this work. And they do what's called the Latin square. And that's where you vary the order in which each participant gets the conditions. So in this particular example, I made it really big and easy for you. There are 4 participants. The first participant gets condition A first, condition B second, condition C third, and condition D fourth. The second participant gets B first, then C, D, A. The third participant gets C first, then D, A, B. etc., etc. So the basic idea behind this is you're kind of rotating the conditions. So if there is an effect, if there is something special about being first or being last, not all the participants are being tested in the order. So this should kind of cancel out, you hope, any carryover effects that might happen with these conditions. Latin squares are pretty popular. Some people will coat them with colors. I stuck that pretty example there for you FDM people, and some will coat them with different letters, but the basic thing is the same. You're just varying the treatment. So now let's come back to our original dilemma. Which study do we choose for that Department of the Transportation study? Do we want a within subjects design where one single group does the driving simulator with both types of signs? Or do we want a between subjects design where we have two separate groups do the driving simulator, one with each sign? You decide. How do you decide? Well, one thing you can do is look at this handy dandy chart, which also serves as a really good study guide for this lecture. And don't forget that your PowerPoint notes are still up on Lovelima, so you have a copy of this slide. So this slide shows you the strengths and weaknesses of between subjects designs versus within subjects designs, and hopefully that'll provide you some really good material to study for the test. Thank you for your patience, and I will talk to you later.